Okay, hello, and welcome to Tech and Learning Conversations. I'm your host, Kevin Hogan, and I'm glad you found us. Today was a really great conversation with a colleague and a friend that I've known for a long time, who has given me many insights into what's happening in the world of EdTech and what our readers and our listeners can do, not just from a day-to-day, but just in a kind of a holistic sense, improve their practices of teaching and learning. Andrew Marcinek is the author of Teaching Digital Kindness and a longtime voice in the EdTech world. Now, recently, he's been watching the Meta lawsuit and the broader big tech accountability reckoning with a lot of recognition because he saw this damage up close. First, as an adult being manipulated by the same algorithms, and then also as an educator watching it happen to kids. Today, he talks about the parallel to big tobacco, what schools have done differently, and crucially, what the window for getting AI right actually looks like. It's a conversation about the past, the present, and the narrow window to do better. So let's get into it. Okay, Andy, thanks so much for joining me today. Always a pleasure to speak to you.
Kevin, it's great to see you, and great to be having a conversation with you again. That outside of our fandom for Philly sports, I mean, we've spent a lot of time talking about our Eagles and our Phillies, so it's nice to kind of get back into technology and tech and learning conversation. So great to be here.
And I don't want to date ourselves, but it's been a while. We've been talking about this stuff for a while.
Yeah, I feel like we started it. You know, it's like no, it's good. It's good.
But I wanted to reach out and talk to you because while your posts on Substack are always informative and insightful, the one recently that hit me was where you talked about the Meta lawsuit and the idea that the big tech firms are now coming up to their kind of big tobacco moment when it comes to their intentional, they're obvious and maybe let's say intentional, but just the manipulation of children and then the use of these technologies for profit. And as you said in your post, we all kind of knew it, but there was nothing to do about it, or we were abusing it ourselves as adults. Maybe let's start where you saw like your first moments of what you had your phone and using Twitter or seeing social media, and as your role as an administrator, what was that moment where it first started for you?
Yeah, no, this is a landmark lawsuit, and it's probably not going to be the last one that we see. I think I think big tech is been put on alert right now, and as they should be. I mean, there's I think the kind of the big tobacco moment is very comparable to how we're putting out this product, and there have been denials up and down the line for the last 20 years of it's not addicting, and yeah, actually it is because they're manipulating it, and I think where it really started for me, and I don't want to go down a political rabbit hole with this, but it started around 2015, 2016. So in that time, I was finishing up my work at the U.S. Department of Education, and I was coming back into schools, and it was right around the time of the 2016 election was coming down the line, and you and I connected on Twitter, and I connected with a whole host of people on Twitter, and I used Facebook to share my work when I was writing for Edutopia. I did some writing for Tech and Learning a while back, and and I felt like it was a great. We had social media in the early days of its kind of conception. It was really great. It was a great tool for connecting and sharing and using hashtags, and there were Twitter chats, and it just felt like this great community. And it was, and then I just felt like it went kind of dark. Like it just got to a really bad place. In my book, Teaching Digital Kindness, I attributed to it's like the alternate universe that Marty goes back to in Hill Valley, where he's Biff is the Biff is the, mayor, and there's casinos, and it's, it doesn't look like what it used to look like. And that's what I feel like happened, both literally and figuratively. And so, um, that's where I started to see kind of for my own self, actually. I was engaging very angrily with people on social media, and I was almost yelling. And I said, I kind of wrote about this in the book, and I said, it reminded me of this, like everyone stopped talking and everyone started talking and listening, and everyone started shouting at each other. So, and I saw myself doing that. And I think after that election, I took some time and I did a lot of reflection, and that's essentially where I saw this is where my book, Teaching Digital Kindness, kind of came about. That was one of the first moments of it. The pandemic was second on that. But from that period, from 2016 through 2020, I just saw people being angry, and people like just shouting, everyone trying to get no one listening, no one engaging. It was just a shouting match. And eventually came out that we saw that Facebook was actually dialing up that because they knew that's what kept people engaged in online. It wasn't, oh, look at this cute picture so I could share with my parents, or I want to share with grandma. It was, hey, look at this political stance I have. I'm going to say it out loud. And then it would, that would fall into someone's feed who maybe is on a different political persuasion. And so the algorithms, we were being manipulated by the algorithms as adults. So I saw that as an adult, but then I looked at it from a child standpoint who don't, they're developing their identity, they're developing their self, and all these milestones of child development. And they were in these same spaces and they didn't know what to do. And so that's where I think, this case really highlights the damage that it did.
So, how do school districts, at an administrative level, as well as how do educators, just being a caring professional for students in their classroom, begin to deal with this on a day-to-day basis, right? I mean, this is
Yeah.
an issue that belongs to society. It's
Right.
it's a burden that is put on the educators, because they're the ones who spend most of the time with these kids, um, and they themselves have as you said, their own issues with dealing with these algorithms. Um,
Yep.
how, how do these things get applied? I know, well, a lot from your book and from your post about just kind of in a general sense about showing empathy and having kindness and exhibiting that. But when you get to the nitty gritty of, put your phone away, as you said, we kind of did two disservices to the students where it's kind of like, here it is, do whatever you want. And now it's
Right.
like, okay, now put it away and you can't use it. I mean, neither of those are a solution. Let's give the listeners here some hope. let's just
Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
the practical insights on how to deal with the situation.
Yeah, and it's a tough question, Kevin. And I say this in the book, like my book is not a silver bullet. Jonathan Haidt's book is not a silver bullet for this stuff. I think there's a lot of what Jonathan Haidt and the Anxious Generation is what I'm referring to is I think there's a lot of good that can be learned in that book. But what I also take away from Jonathan Haidt's book is that we're kind of past that. Like with a lot of that stuff. I mean, is kind of reactive to the moment we're still in. And so I think it's from looking at where the leaks in the pipeline were. I mean, we were, I think there were issues in schools and there were issues at home. I think kids were getting new devices probably before they were ready to understand what they can do with that device. In my book, and I have a new book that is going to be coming out. Kind of the kind of working title is Untangled, because I feel like we've been kind of tangled within these algorithms for the last 15, 20 years. So how do we untangle that? Thinking of it as all a string or shoelaces, and how do we untangle that and try and figure out a way forward? Because like you said, it's not a cell phone ban is not going to solve this in schools. Pulling screens out of schools is not going to solve this.
No.
What's going to solve this is that we need to try and support the generation that has passed, the generation that Jonathan Haidt was talking about in Jenks' generation has passed. Now, those kids are still around, and then there's addictions that are still there. But we need to think about this next generation of kids and how we learn from that period and get things right. And so I think what needs to start to happen is schools need to start to build out their technology programs with intentionality. I think that was really left out of the equation for the past 15 to 20 years. Pandemic was not an assist in that at all. The pandemic only exacerbated what those issues were. Before the pandemic, I was talking about, kids should have breaks from screens, and the Pediatric Society was talking about kids not getting sleep. School counseling offices were expanding. I remember schools that I've been working in, they were expanding their counseling offices because there were so many kids that were stressed, sleep deprivation, and just anxiety, and all these things came about in the last several years. And so I think the first thing that needs to happen is schools need to really understand what kind of time they're giving kids on screens and when that screen is appropriate in school and when it's not. I work with a lot of schools. I've been in a lot of schools. And one thing I see kids get into classrooms and they just pull out a device. And it's just like a second nature thing. I see it with adults. I get into an elevator and I say hi to somebody and they immediately put their phone to their face, or it's like no one wants to talk anymore.
Yeah.
So that's the first part. And then I think the second part is really, bringing parents in on the conversation. I think we leave parents out of the equation a lot. And, it's, part of the article I recently was reading about, it was an NBC News article, and I wrote a post about 3 weeks ago about this, around like how screens are starting to be pulled out of, schools, and parents are organizing around it. And, there's part of me that empathizes with that parent, and as someone who is a parent now, like, do I want my kid in a school that is just passively looking at a screen? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. That doesn't matter if they're in second grade or if they're in 12th grade, I want my kid to understand when a device is appropriate, when it can be used with intention, when it's the right tool. We don't just walk around with hammers and nails all the time thinking that we're going to build something. It's just like, it's the kind of the same concept. So I think there's two pieces that really need to happen, and schools need to start to really interrogate their one-to-one programs and across the board post-pandemic, and then parents need to be brought into the conversation on how much time schools are using with technology. And I'm not talking about huge shifts. I'm talking about this is low-hanging fruit. I mean, you can put together a one-pager and share with parents and say, like, here's what we believe about screens in the schools, and here's how our kids are using them. Done. I mean, that's a maybe two administrative meetings, and get that thing out to parents, and just be transparent with it,
And I think we got about 10 minutes through without even mentioning AI, which is just quite impressive these days.
How much time do we have? Yeah.
But that adds to a whole other level in terms of the student use of that. And I mean, I kind of consider myself to be pretty tech savvy, after 25 years of covering EdTech. And the stuff that's happening, the positives and the negatives with AI are just quite mind blowing. And the student use of it is mind blowing, and already getting ahead of educators and the school system.
Right.
Any suggestions on that? Or, I mean, I've read a little bit about this idea and spoken about changing acceptable use policies to responsible use policies. And just, again, as you say, just like a subtle semantic shift might be all it takes to have people think like how to handle this stuff.
Yeah. And I think it was from I'm looking at a lot of the reports that the RAND Corporation is putting out statistics wise. And I think at like a year ago, there were like, 50% of students were using AI for schoolwork in some capacity. And teachers, I think it was even higher. And so the thing with AI is, and how I'm approaching this is, okay, when I talked to you a little bit about it earlier, like we have this next generation now that we need to look back to what we just were talking about with social media and screen time and all that stuff. And we need to get this right with AI. And so what schools need to be doing is they need to be leaning in and having conversations around AI. It's almost like if you're not, you are doing your school community a disservice of sending kids out into the open, out into the world without any knowledge of probably one of the more powerful technologies in our lifetime, or really anyone's lifetime. And I think it's you don't have to go out and invest in all these tools that you see at conferences and on expo floors. What you need to do is really understand what the tools can do, understand what your kids have access to, look around at what schools are doing around you and what kind of guidance your state is putting out. There hasn't been much up until last week. The federal government put out some guidance on this. So you look to that, and then also apply your like FERPA and COPA and all of your privacy policies and really just kind of, it's like kind of like spring cleaning for ed tech. Like you really need to kind of like figure it out. And what that looks like is, I think you need to make sure teachers are prepared and they have time to do this and they have PD days to understand this that are not taking the time of anything else. Because, working in a school, and we just did this, 2 weeks ago, we had a great professional development day. We had Becky Keene come in. One of our trustees is Ignacio de Silva. He works at Microsoft, and he's working on, he and a team work on the Copilot built in within PowerPoint, Word, and Excel. So he's working on that team and kind of but they're, I think what he said in our PD day last week, we had a panel discussion, and he mentioned the idea of we're looking at two things when we hire people. We're looking at do potential employees have AI literacy skills? Do they understand what AI is? Have they used it? And they're really looking at soft skills. Dario from Anthropic said the same thing. They're saying the same thing. So there's this balance of like companies are going to want kids that understand how to use AI, how to leverage it successfully and appropriately, and making sure that soft skills are still at the forefront. And I think that's what schools need to focus on. They don't need to focus on they're all going to cheat, because guess what? We were saying this when Wikipedia came out. We were saying this when calculators came out. We were saying with smartboards. So like, just wrap that up. And second, along with that cheating thing, I think we need to give kids a lot more credit in this space, because I've talked to a lot of students who understand that. I talked to a student last week here in Massachusetts, and he was saying that, he's like, yeah, I could use it to cheat. I could just have it write my papers and all that stuff. He's like, but I'm not learning skills with that. And he's like, I know I'm going to need skills to succeed at the next level. And so he's already, way ahead of what I think a lot of us kind of assume with students, is that they're just going to use it to cheat.
Yeah.
And I think it's really going to be how students are working alongside of those tools that it'll be really exciting. But to make sure we don't repeat the mistakes of the last 15 to 20 years, and we're not, dragging OpenAI and Anthropic and Gemini and everybody to the courtroom again, is that we need to understand these tools in our schools and make sure we're sending kids off into the world with the understanding, the literacy of AI, and also the appropriate use and when to use AI.
Well, Andrew, I knew the toughest part of this interview would be to end it.
Yeah.
We could go not only the topic, but your insights are valuable for our listeners and our readers. And, we can take this on to a whole series of conversations, but be sure I will be tapping you in the weeks and months ahead for further insights. So thanks again for your time.
No problem, Kevin. It's always great talking with you.
That one line from Andrew is going to stay with me. Everyone stopped talking and everyone started shouting. And he saw himself doing it. There's something important in the fact that this whole conversation about protecting kids started with an adult doing some honest self-reflection. The frame he's offering, that AI is a second chance to build intentional technology programs rather than just hand-kissed devices and hope for the best, feels like the right one to me. And the employer data he cites is hard to argue with. If Microsoft and Anthropic are both saying they want AI literacy alongside soft skills, schools that treat AI as only a disciplinary problem are going to be left behind. Now, Andrew's book, Teaching Digital Kindness, is available now, and he's working on a follow-up, Untangled, which we'll be watching for. Look for links in the show notes. Now, if today's conversation resonated with you, please subscribe to Tech and Learning Conversations and share it with someone in your building. We'll keep this one going. Until next time.